morning, good morning. I was trying to figure out why I kept getting an error message, and I still don't know why I got it, but we had a power outage a few days ago during that big storm, and yeah, it threw everything up. So anyway, good morning. And today we're going to continue the project that we were starting last week. And we were doing some weathered wood and that sort of thing. And today I thought we would continue on with that because we didn't quite get it finished. And we would get right into painting the rusty hardware. So let's, oh, and I may not be Grandma Moses, but I am a grandma as of last week. So, or as of Saturday, as a matter of fact. So I'm a brand new grandma. And yeah, I'm looking forward to putting a paintbrush in her hand and getting her painting. So let me just switch over here to my demo mode, and yeah, this is the image that we were working on. If you are just joining in, maybe before we get rolling here, I'll just ask you to put a comment in the comment section or in the chat and mention where you're from. Pardon me. So this is the printout that I did. Pardon me. And this is as far as I got last week. So just to sort of recap on what I had done, I'd used a variety of different, warm or cool washes to start things, looking closely at my reference picture here, and just slowly started building up things like the wood grain and stuff like that, and then making sure that I got all these pronounced cracks and things going in there. I began this piece here, but I can certainly do a little bit more there. Thank you. Thank you. And I am going to make sure, now this is where my masking is. This is what I had masked off last week. The bolt here at the top and the hook and this hook here and so on. I washed in some really nice blues and then a few warm tones in here into the shadows. I think they could probably be a little bit warmer or a little bit darker than what they are. I'd like to adjust that value to make the whiter areas or the highlight areas stand out a little bit more. So if you want to give the feeling of light, you need dark. So I'm going to maybe use a larger brush for this. Maybe this is a number 2 squirrel hair brush. And just to recap what I am working on, this is a piece of Artches 140-pound cold press watercolor paper. I have pre-stretched it. My palette is mainly DaVinci Watercolors. And I have softened up all my colors. I just use a pipette. And, I add several drops of water to each of my wells to get my paints softened up, and I do that maybe 10 minutes before we start. And let me just move over my screen here so I can see all the comments. Good morning, Verda. Hi, Karen, Dorothy, and Pam. Thank you very much for joining, and thank you for the congratulations. Yes, we're all very excited. Everyone's doing well, and she was about a week and a half early, so it was a little bit of a surprise. Now, I'm going to begin just rewashing this shadow in here, and this was some cobalt blue neutral tint. And I also used a little bit, I believe, I can't remember what I used last week. It might have been a little alizarin crimson, or maybe it was burnt sienna. In any case, it doesn't matter. I am going to just come right in here and start putting in some warm and cool. So the exact color, matching my photo, is really not my priority here. I am, however, trying to get my values correct. So I'm going to come in here with this big brush and I'm just going to use big sweeps, big sweeping stroke here to get this dark shadow in here. And I've really filled up my brush here so that I can get the whole thing in without brush marks. And load it up, that's the way to go. Now I want to get some warm color in here too. Okay, that's a little more pink, I guess, than I was expecting, but that's fine. I don't mind. As long as it's warm. I want to get some warm and some cool in here. And just need to get this a little darker, trying to get this shadow stronger. And you can see how much more sunny this looks once it's got some real dark in there. Now that looks a little bit too blue. I'm going to put a little more neutral tint into this. Of course, it won't dry nearly as bright as what it appears right now, but there we go. So I've really got the strength of that shadow, and it looks a little dark at the moment, but don't forget this is wet and watercolor is going to dry lighter. So there we go. And I'd like to put a little bit more color into this shadow over here on the left side as well. So I'm going to bring some of that same coloring over here. This one's already pretty dark, but I want to get a little bit more color into this. There we go. And I'm also going to come up here into this inset for the screw and get that darker as well. So I'm going to come in here and darken this. I'm going to use a little of that burnt sienna since this is kind of rusty looking, and really get that kind of built up in terms of darkness. I think I'd like to see a little burnt sienna down in here too. So I'll just add a little bit of that in. And this is, you can see this is really wet, what I'm working with. Really want to get some smooth washes here, so wet is the way to go. But of course, once you go really wet, it takes longer to dry. So I'm going to enlist the help of my dryer for that. A little bit more burnt sienna. There. Right, so that's cobalt, burnt sienna, and I've really got some really strong shadow there. And it looks like it's almost too dark at the moment, but don't forget how much lighter this is going to dry. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put myself on mute. I hope you can hear me all right. I just realized my microphone was halfway across the room. But now that I've brought it closer, I need to put myself on mute so that you don't have to listen to my dryer. Okay, so this will just take a minute. I just want to dry this, and we can get on to some of the other parts. Okay, so look how much lighter that has dried. Now it looks to be about the right value. Sometimes you have to compensate for these washes, you know, when they're wet because you know that it's going to dry lighter. So I'm much happier with that now. It is a little bit more toned down. I added that little bit of neutral tint to neutralize it, but you can really still see the, prominent blues and warm tones in there as well. And I love putting combinations of warm and cool together because I think that they really make my paintings a little bit more enticing. They have, just a little bit more interest. And so obviously in some of these areas, I could be building up a little bit more texture. So I'm going to start using a little bit of this neutral tint here and see if I can bring in a little bit more character into some of this. So I'm going to use a little bit of dry brush here, and I will blot my brush, and I'm going to use the side of my brush and drag and see if I can get a little bit more sort of coarseness in some of this wood. I'm not trying to make it dark. I'm just trying to add a little bit of texture. So blot my brush, get right down. My handle's almost parallel to the paper. And if I put too much on, like that, just blot off the excess. So I can get quite a bit of control here. And I want to do a little bit more on this side. You can see my brush is pretty dry because I can't get much off of it. And it's just sort of catching the wood, or catching the grain of the paper and giving me that wonderful texture. That's what I like about the cold press paper. It's not as smooth as, say, a hot press or something like that. So it's actually, catching that little grain of wood. So one of the things here that I'm really feeling is kind of missing here. First of all, this feels like, now that I've darkened my shadow, this feels like it's maybe a little bit on the light side. So I might tone this a little bit. So I'm going to take a little bit of that cobalt and my more burnt sienna, but really thin because I want to keep this looking like it's in the sun. And let's see, I just want to wash in here a little bit more color. Not much, just, it's just a little hint of color here. And come down here just to take the whiteness out of that. It looked a little too fresh for such an old piece of wood. There we go. That's a little better, I think. And I'm going to take that neutral tint and I'm going to come and put a few more grains, or I guess this is the wood grain here, down my wood here. And I'm just pulling with my whole arm to get, my longer lines here. And I really don't want to make it look like stripes, so I'm trying to keep my paint somewhat transparent. This is neutral tint, great color. And I'm actually pulling my whole arm, so I just sort of lock my brush, and actually I can make it a little bit rough here. I'm going to stop at the hole right there and then continue on the other side. And I can go thick and thin, and that's the great thing about weathered wood. It just isn't that doesn't need to be perfect. So it's a great way to get over that perfectionism. Now it's getting a little too even, so I'm going to skip over. I'm going to do, or maybe I'll do a really, really skinny one. So really up on the tiptoe of my brush, and we'll do some skinny ones, really skinny. went a little wonky there, it doesn't matter. Now I'll do a thicker one. And so really want to make sure that it's not spaced too perfectly here. I'm sort of loosely looking at my picture, but not really sticking to it too much. And do a couple of them close together. I have to make a conscious effort to do this. Boy, it sure is human nature to make things even and make a pattern out of things, and nature just isn't that way. So you have to really work hard to make things look a little bit more irregular and so on. So I'll make a couple of these maybe a little bit darker. So let's go over that one, make it a little bit darker. I don't want everything too even, like too much the same. Too much the same is boring. Right, so get some character in these. I don't have to, sure don't have to make it like the photo. I just need to make it similar type of idea. You could make it exact, but I don't know that I need to do that. Just, you know, leave a little bit of a gap. And put another one. And so that irregularity makes it look more natural. I'm just going to darken a little bit of this because I just need to make it a little bit varied. Make a couple of them darker. There we go. So if I use this neutral tint almost full strength, it's going to be quite a nice dark deep gray, and I can really add some extra darks in here if I want to. There's not too much that's extra dark, but one thing I do want to do is give it a little bit more shadow on this left side, because there's a plane change, right? We actually see, it's not very much, but we slightly see the side of this. So I'm going to come down with my neutral tint here and just darken this side of the wood, just so we see that it's, you know, got a plane change there. Okay, so so our wood is getting pretty close to done. One thing I will do though is I want to create a little bit of texture in this chinking, I think it's called, on a log cabin, and somebody wrote to me and told me what that name was, and thank you very much. I forgot who that was, but appreciate the that little bit of reminder about what that was called. So I'm just putting a little bit of, not that it would matter, but I don't want it to all look the same. So I'm trying to isolate this little spot here, and I'm going to take my tiny fan brush. I love doing my spatters with a fan brush, much better than using a toothbrush, because the toothbrush tends to, you know, it flicks it too hard, and so sometimes you get like little streaks, sometimes you get it all over you, and that sort of thing. So I'm going to take my neutral tint over here in my palette and my fan brush, and I'm going to put some in here, make it fairly dark. Let's give that a little blot just so it's not too much. Now I just hold it close and I tap my brush, and I can get the finest little spatters, which is awesome. I'll take it right over into the shadows because, well, it does go into the shadows. And that's just enough, I think. I'm gonna keep that. And I've got some really nice spattery look there. It looks like little pinholes. If it's too dark, I'll just give it a blot. You know, you can take some of that off. And I'm just kind of stalling here for a minute before I take off my masking fluid, because all of this really needs to be dry. So I'm going to come over here to this side, and I'm just going to use this fan brush. I don't usually use my fan brush for grains, but this one's, if I just hold my fan brush way back here on my handle, I can drag it and just let it skip, and I can get a little bit of a nice wood grain there. Just very faint, not much on my brush, and just enough to get a little bit of a grain happening. And yeah, so that pretty much does my my wood. I could fuss a little bit more, but I think one thing I'll just add is, you see here that it's probably when it was being milled way back when. You get these sort of lines that go this way. So I'm going to just take I'll just use my fan brush for this, and I'm just going to come across with a couple of little milling marks. That's good. It makes it look gold. Just can even streak in a couple places here. That's good. And now I am going to take, just to make sure this is fully dry, because I can see my paper's a little bouncy. It feels dry, but it's a little bouncy. So what that's telling me is that the surface is dry, but underneath, like the core of the paper, may still be wet. So bear with me a second. I'm going to dry this a little bit longer before I take the masking off. And that's because the masking will come off better from dry paper, and I don't want any of this to be a little bit damp where I could damage it in the removal of the masking, because the tool I'm using is a little bit harsh on the surface. So I'm going to mute. I'm going to dry this, and by the way, I will. I'm staying away from my masking with my heat. I don't want to heat up my masking fluid. I could bake it onto my paper, which is bad news. So bear with me a second. I'm going to mute again, and I will just dry this and be back in a second. Okay, so I think I'm dry, and the next thing to do is to get rid of this masking. So I'm going to use a rubber cement pickup eraser, and you can find that where the rubber cement is, or you can find it where the masking fluid is, usually. At least that's where it should be, in my opinion. And I'm just removing the masking from the rusty hardware, the metal pieces. When I remove masking, well, see, it might be a little bit damp there, and see what's happening. I'm transferring some of that color. Pick this off. It won't matter because it's an old rusty piece of metal, but nevertheless, if you want to get that clean, you've got to make sure you've got it on there, and it's fully dry before everything's fully dry before you remove this. I also take when I use this tool, I pull in one direction because if I go back and forth, it sort of raises up the grain. You know, it's like patting a dog both ways. Usually only pat it one way to keep the fur flat. So same thing here. I'm just going to pull that off. Okay, so let's get some color in here and put the fan brush away for now. Take up this is my smaller number 6 squirrel hair brush, and I want to get the main color put in here, the local color, the sort of that undercoat. So it's not very shiny anymore, that's for sure, but there is a little bit of light hitting the end of the hook, and of course where it's curved here into the loop. So as I put the main color in here, I want to keep those areas a little bit lighter. So I'm going to use mainly, let's see, I'll use some burnt sienna. I'm going to use some burnt sienna, but I'm going to put a little bit of that alizarin crimson into this as well. Make it just a little more red. Okay, so I'm going to focus on this one down here and just basically paint this in, get the first wash, get rid of that white paper, and now I want that little white spot or the highlight in there, so I'm going to leave a space around that area and paint this in. Now as I get down to the hook where it's actually light there too, I'm going to go around that. Now I'm just going to rinse my brush and blot it and paint this in. I'm just going to soften these edges, and that will basically close in, but it won't close in with paint, it'll close in with water. So I'm blotting my brush, and because it's not pure white, obviously, it's a rusty old thing. It's got some character. And so I just need to keep it light. I don't have to have it the white of the paper. So I can lift out, just pull out anything there that closes in too much. I can keep that light. Now this one up here, this one's interesting because this one doesn't look as red as the one below. This one actually looks a little more blue, so it might sound a little weird, but I'm going to do this one with that cobalt mixture that I have up here. And I'm doing that because just the way the light is hitting this is making it very cool. I guess the metal, the gray metal, the silver, I guess silver color that it would have been, it still remains a little bit through all that rust. And so in some places I can put a little bit of rust, so I'm going to pick up that color I was using below, and I'm going to just sort of dabble it in a few places so that I have a combination of blue and rust here. All right, just so I have the start. I'm going to zoom in on this since I'm working fairly close now. And it sure doesn't look like anything at the moment. It just kind of looks like a mess. But it will come along. So back to my palette, I'm going to pick up that alizarin crimson mixed with my burnt sienna because I want to make it a little bit more reddish. Permanent alizarin crimson and burnt sienna, and I'm going to put a little bit of neutral tint into this, which is going to make it quite dark. And I want to start establishing where some of these darks are. Now this may still be a little bit wet here, so I can just allow that to mix in. It just makes it look even more rusty. And remember, I always start things a little bit brighter than they need to be in the end, because ultimately I can dull things down, but I can't brighten them up again. That's one thing I figured out. So I'm just getting some of the darker bits of rust in here, and I'm just kind of dabbling them in. I'm not really, I do actually have a shadow here, so that's kind of a line, but then the rest of the rust is kind of just dabbled in, and it's melting into that that rough texture. The surface of the paper has been roughened up slightly with the rubber cement pickup eraser. Wish they would give that a shorter name. But anyway, so just dabbling into this. If it's too dry, if my paper has dried, it will end up being more polka dotty. So I can just take my brush and just a blotted brush and just drag a blotted brush down there. It's not really adding a lot of water. It's just dampening the spot. So I can come in, and I'm focusing more on each side because I want to make this look cylindrical. And so I need to create a change in value from left to right if I want to make sure that I'm making it look cylindrical. All right, so I'm dabbling in just to the point of my brush here, smaller brush so I can dabble a little bit. And just because I dampened that surface, blot my brush a bit, just by dampening the surface, I have managed to create sort of irregular little speckles. They're not landing perfectly and looking like polka dots. They're all kind of melting a little bit. And this is really going to make it look nice and rusty. And I'm just going to keep building up some of this rusty texture, getting a little darker on the sides. It starts getting really dark in here, so I'm going to get a little more of that neutral tint down in here. So neutral tint, and that's going to come up here, and just I'm dabbling in. I'm not really painting a straight line or anything like that. Just dabbling it in. And in such a small area, when you have something this small and rusty, it's not very convenient to spatter. At first, I had put in the description, I put some tape, and I was going to tape it off and be all fussy and all of that sort of thing. And then I thought, that's a bit ridiculous. So I'm going to take that out of the description and just to focus on painting this with a small brush. So straight line right at the edge where it's a shadow, where the shadows are nice and strong. I can get a smooth line there, but then I dabble to get it into sort of integrated into the rust, I guess. So, kind of looking for a couple of places where it would be extra dark. And the thing about neutral tint is, it doesn't get too dark too fast on you. You can play with it a little bit and it dries a little bit lighter, and then you can add a little bit more, and you can sort of build it up a little better than, say, Payne's gray, which is not only a cooler gray, but it's a more opaque, so it'll cover up more. Just getting some of my extra darks in here, and you can really see that starting to form a contour there, that it's actually beginning to look a little rounded. And this looks a little bright right here. This highlight looks maybe a little bit bright, but I think we can get that incorporated pretty well. When things are a little bit drier, I can actually add in a little bit more there. Put too much on, just blot it off with paper towel. That's pretty straightforward. And let's come down here to the bottom of the hook, and again, I want to have that end, the end of the hook, the cut part, much lighter. It's facing towards the sun, and so it's going to have a lot more. And a lot of this is feeling like it's completely dry, so if I want my dots to sort of melt and so on, I can come in with small dots at the end when it's dry, but right now I want to get that sort of melted, softened look. So this is pretty dark. It's going to have some neutral tint in here, and I'm dabbling it in. And it's just sort of melting itself into the texture. And but I'm trying as much as I can not to make it look too smooth. So I don't want to take my brush and just bring it down and fill that in. That's fine for the first wash, but beyond that, I would really start to focus on texture at that point. So I'm going to go a little bit darker, just come in with a few more layers. I'm going to come in with just neutral tint right here. This is fairly dark in here, and I've already got that sort of red undertone. So a little bit darker on this right-hand side. Dabble, dabble. And it may feel like I'm just dabbling into a melted, like it's all melting together, but it's actually giving me a pretty good texture. I could take some of those reds and put that in too. And this whole area will end up being dark, but I may have to wait for some of that to dry before I can come back in. So some of this is starting to dry, and I will just use my neutral tint, get a little stronger here, and indicate these shadows. Like there's a shadow right on the top of this. This piece of wood is casting a shadow across that. So that needs to be on there. And you can see how effective these extra darks are going to make things. Let's get that extra dark there. But I don't want it to look like a stripe, so I'm putting a few dots along the edge of it so it looks like it's really weathered. Now we've got another shadow right here. Okay, so right here we have this shadow coming across this whole thing. So I'm taking my neutral tint and I'm going right across that. You might think I'm just covering up what I just did, but it actually is a nice that's the thing I like about neutral tint, is it's kind of a nice neutral in it. It will actually show through. So this whole thing here is in shadow. There we go. So now that really looks like it's in shadow. Pretty convincing, right? So now this looks a little bit too stark. It needs a little bit more of that reddish color. Now I want to go reddish, not the gray, because now it's facing the light. Now I'm dampening it first because I put those couple of dots in there and they instantly just became polka dots. So I wanted to make this look a little bit more authentic, so I just dampened this first. You know, and the type of line you're putting on your painting can make a huge difference. You know, if it's a soft line or a hard line, and that goes for even dabbles like that. You know, this dabbles, you know, you might think, well, just dabble. You just put your brush down and you make a dabble. And you you need to have a variety of edges to make things look real. So I can have a few crisp lines like this, and that works really well, but all this texture in here, I would not, it would look so polka dotty and harsh if I simply put it on dry paper. So that's why I just took my brush and just slightly dampened it. And that might seem like a really small thing, but it can make a huge difference. Thank you very much. I'm getting lots of congratulations on becoming a new grandma. Yeah, very exciting. So there we go. So get some darks in here, just building up a little bit more of the I still have to have the volume. I still need to have it a little darker on the edges there and so on. But that is now looking pretty satisfactory, I think. And I'm going to come up now to the bolt, and we're going to do something similar. So I'm going to start with a clean blotted brush, just dampen this whole thing. And I mean just a little bit damp. I'm not putting a lot in here, just a little damp, just so I'm not painting into a bone dry surface. Thank you very much, Pam. Pam says, don't forget to hit like. Thank you. Yeah, I would appreciate that actually. So if I dabble into the damp surface, now I have to make sure my brush isn't too wet either, but I can dabble into this damp surface, just the tip of my brush, and I'm looking closely at where it's, you know, might have a little bit more and where the highlights might be and things like that. So I am, you know, it might seem like I'm just dabbling, but I am looking to see exactly, you know, where all this rust is. Not much of that metal still showing, but there's a tiny bit. So I can come in now to my neutral tint, and I'm going to go pretty full strength color here, not a lot of water. And I need to start creating a few of the shadows. So I have a few darks here, this dark line here, and then, you know, I need to create the shape here. Thank you, Deborah. So I'm going to start maybe here, and I'm really using the tip of my brush to create this shape here because it's, you know, pretty fine lines, and it's tapered line. It's not just one line, right? You don't just divide the line and call it a day. It actually tapers off. So I have to look at the shape here. So there's, you know, a little bit of a shape there, and then this comes up and tapers off. Right? Almost connects to the other side. And then there's a hard line here. A hard line here. Tapering again, so starting at the very tip of my brush, then pressing a little harder to get it a little fatter, right? And that's going to help make that washer look like it's rounded. But I do need a little bit more shading on my washer here, so just going to take some neutral tint, not full strength this time, just a little bit of neutral tint, and I'm going to start dabbling into some of the, to create the roundness, I need to you know, get a little more shadow on that rounded part, so it needs to sort of taper off to the shadows here. And it's just on this one side, not both sides. I think I need a little more rust. What do you think? I think a little bit more rust. It would have been so easy to just look at this and say, okay, well, the bottom one is red, so let's make the top one red too. And that would be our brain going autopilot, right? So you want to make sure you're actually looking to see what it is it's there. It's not always what you expect. All right, so that bolt is looking pretty good. Now we have, oh my gosh, this is so dark in here. I can't see much of anything that's happening. So I'm where the screw is here, I'm going to use a little bit of lifting technique to get this back. So the middle of this, and it's like super dark even in the printout, you can hardly see it. But I'm going to lift out, just use a damp brush and blot. And I'm going to lift out the middle of that screw that's in the middle. Just a blotted brush to lift out some of the wood grain. Now the wood grain doesn't go all the way across because of course there's a screw right down here. So I have to stop where the screw is. Blot. Blot. All right, so it's in shadow, but might have taken off a little more than necessary, so just put it back. Pretty simple. Just a couple little specks with my neutral tint to get the grain there. And now you can sort of hardly see, but you can sort of see that screw in the middle. And it's pretty obscured by shadow, but you can see it. So let's zoom out and see what we have. I think we're pretty much done this one, and pretty convincing. If I feel like, I think it's on screen, it looks a little bit more gray. It's actually in person, it looks pretty good. It looks more like this in person. It's just, cameras and all. But, yeah, I'm kind of liking how this looks, and I think this is done, so I'm going to take off my tape. Everything looks better without the tape, right? There we go. So this one's done pretty much. There is maybe just a couple of extra little lines that I might want to add in. So, now that I see it like this, I can come in and maybe just add a little bit more here and there. Texture-wise, I could put in some more of these cracks, or dry brush even. So take the side of my brush here and drag it around that knot hole to make it look a little stronger, that type of thing. You can make all those little adjustments, but essentially that's the bare bones, and this looks pretty convincing. It's actually looks a little bit more sunny than this image here, but I like it, so I'm leaving it. I like it. I love textures, so much fun. All right. Thank you very much, Margot. Thanks. So, yeah, that wraps it up for today. Thank you so much for joining, and do check out my website, which is shelleypryor.com, and check out the Zoom workshops that I have there, and you'll see I have like lots of full-length projects. I've got a really cool one coming up this week that's a whole series of different fancy guitars that I saw in a music store. And yeah, so we will see you next week. Not sure what we're doing yet, but we'll find out. Tune in, and we'll see you later. Have a great week. Bye.